And thanks to everyone who has taken the time to join us today. This is really the second part of when we're talking about capture. So before I do a dive into what we're doing with FileHold, I just want to do a summary of what we talked about last time. We were looking at we configured the capture for the system. So we went through the system configuration, the different options that are in there. We set up a custom template. We added our scanned documents, and then we exported those documents over to our CSCANs location. So as my favorite movie, Bull Durham says, it's a simple game. You throw the ball, you hit the ball, you catch the ball. So what we did last time was we put the ball into play, we threw the ball, now it's time for us to catch the ball and receive it. And to do that, we're going to use a FileHold function called managed imports. Now I'm not going to spend a lot of time here with slides. I often do at the beginning, so we're going to take a deep dive into this. I just want to make a couple of quick comments about managed imports. First of all, it requires the FileHold desktop application. It requires the FDA. The FDA is what we use to actually manage the import, which means that it's specific to each install of FileHold. So if you're looking at setting up managed imports for another user, you need to be an administrator to do the configuration there, or you need to install the managed import template on the back end. The other comment to make is we're going to need one managed import per capture form template because that information is baked into the capture. So it's what we're doing to associate the capture form with the managed import and FileHold. So let's take a dive into this. I'm just going to go into my FileHold environment here. There we are, and we're going to open up FileHold. So this is our standard FDA version, and we can see my inbox is empty. What we did last time was we were in capture and we had our forms. Here I've got 4 new ones and I have them processed. They're all ready to go, and I'm ready to hit the export button to push these out of capture and have them ready. From the FileHold, from the Windows side, here is my CSCANs location. So last time we met, here are my 3 documents, and there's an XML file with this. A quick word about the XML, because we talked about this briefly last time. I'm just going to open this up with Notepad. So this is my XML form that's coming in. So the form is identified as webinar invoices. So that means that if I was to modify my webinar invoices form, I'm going to need to update my managed import by mapping the XML to it. I'll explain a bit more about that later. But what I want to point out is these are my fields for each of my documents, so I can see what was tagged and they're ready to go for coming into FileHold. Now this is XML, which is a machine readable language, which will be able to be read by FileHold once configured. And the tool that we use to make that reading is the managed import. So back into the desktop application, we're going to go up to Tools, and we'll select our managed imports. And then from here, we're going to go Add, because we're going to be adding a new managed import process in. Now, you may see this, you also may not. There's an optional setting that will configure whether or not you see this, but I want to point out that this may come up, and there's 2 ways that we can look at an XML. We have a classic way of looking at it, which is using the dynamic import feature, which is a totally different set of options, and it's for bringing over information that you may have exported from FileHold, uses the classic FileHold XML. We're not using that today. Instead, from the drop-down, we're going to choose our second option, which is capture, or the current FileHold XML. So we're going to say OK to that, and then this is the screen that we're going to use to configure our managed import. So first thing we need to do is give this a name. So because I called this webinar invoices before in capture, we're going to follow the same thing here. So my import for this process is my webinar invoices process. We can put a description into here, which is totally optional. I'm not going to bother. We then need to choose where the import file is coming from. Now, if you remember when we were looking at capture, I mentioned under the tools, we have our settings, we have our scanner, which is outputting, sorry, our archive, which is outputting to CSCANs, and our XML output, which is exporting to CSCANs. And then baked within the XML document within this template, we have that same location, CSCANs, and there's the document. So this is the document that this XML form is pointing at. And if I go back over to my Windows, we can see these are my 3 documents and my XML is pointing at these. So if I move these documents prior to the manage import being completed, the XML is not pointing FileHold at the right direction. So we want to make sure that we complete this process of the manage import before we do anything else. If you need to change this location to something other than C-scans, which is totally valid, make sure you update this, make sure you update your archive, and most importantly, make sure your managed import is pointing at the right place. So we want to make sure that, oh, go away. Sorry, I clicked the wrong thing. We just want to go here to select folder containing the import file. So we're going to browse for that. And then we're going to go to our C-scans location. So we'll find C and there's scans. And we're going to say OK. And now that's saying this is where you're going to find the XML file. Now the XML file does not necessarily need to be in the same place as the archive, the output from Capture. They can be in two different places. But if they are, we need to make sure that that the proper place where we're creating the settings within here, that we have the archive is established as what that place is, so the XML goes to C-scans or whatever we're pointing it at. So as long as your language here is correct, as long as the archive is accurate, and as long as the XML export is accurate, then you're okay to have a different location for those two spots. We're going to keep things simple and use C-scans. If you can keep things simple, I highly recommend keeping things simple. Just makes life easier. Now that we've done that, we need to now retrieve the XML. We need to tell it what the XML is that we're using to bring these documents over. So here we're going to choose our XML. It's the only one I have over there because it's the export that I did in our last session, and we're going to say OK. Now, if it's been successful, if the formatting is correct, if everything is right, then we're going to get the notice saying fields have been successfully retrieved or retrieved successfully. Yay. So we know that this is working now. We know that we're ready to move on to our next steps of the process, and we're going to say OK. Now, there's going to be job automation settings on each one of these pages. I am not going to be using those. And the reason I'm not using those right now is because I'm in my testing mode. Automation's fantastic, and it's a very powerful tool for bringing the right document to the right place. But I don't want to use this until I know that everything's working successfully. So my first time around, I leave my automation off, and I'm going to keep exporting the document over again to make sure that it's working successfully. So I've completed what I need to for now on this tab. I will come back to this before I close this to deal with the job automation settings. When I say close, before I'm done my testing process. So we'll come back and look at our settings here for job automation, just not yet. All right, field mapping. This is where we're now going to associate the information in the XML with a schema within FileHold. So we're dealing with invoices, so I'm going to choose my AP invoices document type. Now, in my schema for FileHold, I have fields like the invoice number, invoice date, vendor total, notes, departmental list, PO number, and GL code. When we go back over into Capture, and I'm going to close this out here, we can see in our form template that we are not using those fields. And I just realized it looks like I'm actually using the wrong form template over here. So I need to just update that. So I'm going to use my active form definition, webinar invoices, and then I'm going to remove my documents because unfortunately you can't have them open over here. So I'm going to remove my documents. Sorry about this. I just realized I was in the wrong template there. And so let's just double check and make sure I'm in the right one. So nope, I wasn't right in the right one. There's my webinar invoices. That's the problem. What I didn't do before was double check that I was in the right form definition. And now we're going to open, and I'm just going to grab a single document and add it over here just so that we can have it validated. And so now it's going to load and process that. And you know what? Let's just do a second one for fun. So what do I have here? I don't want that one. That's a sample I was given from a client, and I don't want to put it onto our recording. There we go, perfect. I'm going to use this one. So I have my second document now. Now you'll see that it's flagged for the PO number, but it hasn't flagged for those additional fields of metadata. So it hasn't looked for example, it's not looking for the departmental list or the notes or the GL code. That's information that I understand that's separate from the information that might be on the document. So we are not required to map 100% of the information that we're looking for in the schema over from the document. However, if any of these fields are required, we're going to stop the import process at that point and have the documents land in the inbox. We won't be able to do any auto-filing rules necessarily. We'll have to complete those fields of information. For our purposes now, I'm just going to open up one of my source fields, and these are my fields of information. You may remember this format, the FT underscore, capital letters underscore, and then capital letters again. That is the same, we're going to go back into Capture, as when we were looking at our active form definitions. So if I edit our form definitions, this is the same as the ID over here. So the ID is being baked into the XML to make sure we have the correct information, and the right information is now going to come across. Perfect. So we're going to go back into FileHold, and now we're going to successfully map. So our invoice number maps to invoice number, invoice date maps to invoice date, vendor name maps to vendor, total maps to total, PO number maps to PO number, and the rest of these fields are empty. That's how I want it to be. So that's how I want it. So if I don't necessarily have a PO number and it doesn't export and there's nothing here, it's still going to match it across, but it might match it blank. Whereas it's going to ignore notes, departmental list, and GL code because there's no information being mapped over from there. Excellent. That's now enough that I could save this and I would be ready for my first manage import. However, there's a couple of things that I'm going to look at first. First of all is my database lookup. I'm not going to be doing a database lookup, but I could be doing it from here. Let's say, for example, my GL coding was being contained within my accounting software. So I can say, hey, use this invoice number and use that to look up the GL codes and populate that information against the document. Now, we're not doing that today. One, because I don't have that configured over here, and two, it goes outside of our standard training, so we're not going to cover that, but I wanted to show that these are the functions that are ready to go. Next, we have auto-filing. And auto-filing is saying to FileHold, here's what I want you to do with this document when it comes in. Now, if all of these documents are going to the same place, and that's what we're going to do for our first test here, I'm going to automatically send files to the same spot, and I'm going to browse for that. So this is going to go into accounting, and because these documents are coming in from a scan, I want it to go to my incoming invoices. Simple fixed location, because that's where I want the documents to end up. So we're going to say okay to that. And that's everything that I need to do for my filing rules. There's some other options here, and we're going to explore that in a couple of minutes. The other option down here is I could then automatically send any file with a file status of ready to send. Again, those job automation settings, but I'm going to leave that turned off because, again, I want to manually trigger these actions. When I'm happy with this, I can say OK, and that saves now my new webinar invoices managed imports. If I want to get into the settings for those again, I can come over here and I can click webinar invoices, and then I can go into my settings. And I'm going to do that a couple of times throughout our session today. If I want to actually look at manipulating this, I can select it, which means anywhere other than here. So I can select the line, that highlights it, and now my start and my reset statistic buttons both turn on. So start means I'm going to trigger the action and it's going to run out and look for those documents. So I click start, and we have batches 1 of 1 completed and 3 documents imported. So now when I go over to my inbox, here are my 3 documents marked as ready to send. So before I send these, let's go over and take a look at my AP incoming invoices. We can see it's empty, and we'll go over to my inbox, and now we're going to send all these documents marked as ready to send. So we'll click send all, and the documents get processed out of here over to my incoming invoices. Here are my documents now arrived. They've been given a proper file name to them, so I can see that they have invoice. I can see that they've been renamed using the metadata for it. If I select any one of my documents, then I can see the metadata fields complete onto this. So I can see the total. I can see there's no PO number on this one. And we'll go to our second document. So no PO number here, and we'll go to our third document, and no PO number here. But the rest of the metadata has been completed based on SmartSoft Capture from our last session. So we brought that information over. Excellent. Now we're going to head back over to Capture. And before I do anything else, I'm going to export these again. So I just want to make sure that the information here is valid. If you want to see a test of the PO number, let's just enter a value into this. So we'll put a PO number into each of these, not being found on the document. That's okay. I'm just manually assigning the information. And before I do anything else, I'm just going to go into my tools, and I'm just going to make sure that this is turned off for now, which is removed exported documents from the current session. So we're going to say okay to that. So I'm going to hit export in a moment, but before I do that, let's start turning on some automation over here. So the first thing I'm going to do is go up to my inbox, or go up to my managed imports, go into my settings for this, and I'm going to ask this to turn on the automation to watch for new files to be imported and automatically tag and bring them into the inbox. So that's the first step of automation that I want to turn on. So instead of my having to select and start the managed import, now it's going to work for me automatically. And the second thing I'm going to look at is over here under auto filing, which is automatically send files to the FileHold library with an inbox status of ready to send. We saw our 3 documents come in before, and they were complete. So they were marked as ready to send, so I knew that part was working. Now I can turn on my job automation settings. Once I've done that, we can say OK, and we're ready now to do our export again. So over in Capture, we're going to hit Export, and we've now completed the export of these 2 documents. And I haven't closed them when I'm finished that, because that's what I want this to, I'm going to be running this a couple times. So now we're back in FileHold, and we see batches 2 of 2 completed and a total of 5 documents imported. So I know that that's working. And I come over now to my incoming invoices, and here's the additional 2 documents that I brought over. Same timestamp on them because I did them so close to each other, but you see that in principle we brought we now have 5 documents over here. We are ready for further processing. So this has now received that document through the XML. This process can be used for any XML that's related to a document that has the proper formatting. In this case, I'm using it with Capture, but if you have another software and it can produce your document's metadata as an XML file, you can try using a managed import to read that metadata and bring it across. If the metadata is not, or the XML that your other program is outputting is not formatted properly, 1, try the other format that we saw there, or 2, you can also try reformatting your XML. There is software. I'm not going to recommend any products in particular, but I know there's very inexpensive or free software out there that can reformat your XMLs into the format that FileHold would prefer. If you do that, then it means that you can use the managed import process for any software to bring any document over. It's very powerful. So a quick recap of what we've done. We've gone into our, not watch folders, we've gone into our manage imports, and we've built ourselves webinar invoice, and now we're ready to bring documents over on the regular. We can also delete the input files after they've been successfully added to the FileHold library. So this automatically deletes the documents from the cscans location. It's not a bad thing to do. We can also, however, move those input files to a selected folder so that we clear out the cscan section and instead move them to another area where then you can manually delete them wherever you want, which is another solution to it. We recommend doing that when you have high confidence values with the automation that we're experiencing using Capture. I want to show one other aspect, and that's back over here with the auto filing, and I want to talk about using an auto filing rule to send the document to the right place. So we could, if we wanted to, automatically send files to the auto filing location defined in the document schema. So whatever I'm using in the schema, I can say automatically apply the auto filing rule to anything that's going to be coming in. I can also use a custom template. So I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. So maybe when I'm using the auto filing location within the document schema, I'm always doing the same thing. So let's go back over to, let's cancel this, and I'm going to open up my web administration panel. And we're going to go down to our document schemas, and we're going to take a look at our AP invoices document filing. So here I have an auto filing rule down here, which is using a template. We're going to look at that template in a moment. So maybe this is the one that I use every time I'm bringing in my invoices. I want to always use this template because people who are adding the documents into here, these have already been approved, or they're coming over from another system, or they have a provenance. They, that at one point there was a different process being used on them. And that's a great tool that I was using then, because I'm saying, okay, I'm going to automatically put these invoices by the vendor, first letter, and the year, for example. Or maybe I'm going to go with the year as the folder group, and then a folder that matches the company's initial, whatever I want to do. So this is part of the auto filing, and we've done a webinar in the past on what auto filing can do. Now, when I'm using Capture, on the other hand, maybe these are invoices that are coming in that are brand new. Maybe these have never been seen before, they've not been validated. I don't want these to go to the same place. So in my auto filing rule, I might say that here, rather than using the standard rule that I would use with the document schema, send them to the incoming invoices. So I know that when an invoice arrives there, I know it needs to be approved. I know it needs additional processes for it. Whereas if it automatically goes into its folder, then I'm going to use that instead. I can, as a third option, I could automatically send the files using a different rule that I've chosen. So I could say, for example, always use my invoices by vendor and first letter and year, and use this process only with capture, but use a different process when the documents are coming over from the inbox or when they're manually being added. So I can choose what route of automation makes the most sense for me. Now, if you want to see what this looks like, I'm going to show you that. So we're going to say OK to this, and I've built my auto-filing rule. Because I've built an auto-filing rule that doesn't currently, would create structure that doesn't exist, let me show you what that's going to look like. Again, we've done webinars on auto-filing, but I just want to cover this quickly. I'm using this as a sample document. I'm not actually going to send this into the system, but I want to show you what the auto-filing rule looks like. So we're going to go down here to AP invoices, and we're going to set some metadata for our document. We set an invoice number. We'll use today's date. We'll use our vendor name, which is FileHold, so it starts with an F. We'll have our total, which is $1, and those are all of the required fields. So I'm going to save that information to it. When I click Autofile, it's going to determine where this document's going to live, and it's going to use my rules that are built in the auto-filing template. So let's go back over to here, and we're going to go to our auto-filing templates, and let's have a closer look at invoices by vendor and first letter and year. And we'll go to our edit. And so what this says is when the document is when the document has been associated with this, create a folder called Accounting Web Demo. If there's no drawer, create a drawer called AP. If there's no folder group, create a folder group using the invoice date and the year. And if there's a folder definition, then use the first letter of the word to be able to match to the document. So we have a set of rules here that's using some fairly complex things. So just use the first letter when the text field matches that. So just use that first part of it. That's our structure that we've built. What we see over here, we go back into FileHold, is accounting. So we've got our name of our folder, which is Accounting Web Demo, followed by an AP drawer, followed by 2023 for the year, and followed by F for the folder. Now this hasn't been built because it's in green. So that's why it says this folder does not exist yet in the library. It will be created when the document is filed. So that's a rule that we put into place. Perfect. Let's remove that from the inbox. I don't actually want to add that. And now we're going to go back into Capture. And if everything's working properly, it's going to send these documents to a location that doesn't exist yet. So we're going to set ourselves up to be in our managed imports because I can see how many batches have been completed. So I know when this is run. And now we're going to come back to over here and we're going to hit our export button. So off goes the documents. We come back over here and we're looking for when the batch is completed here moves from 2 of 2. Now it's 3 of 3, 7 documents imported. We know that's come in yet. We don't see any difference here yet because I haven't refreshed my structure. So I'm going to right click on my library and we're going to refresh. And here's our new cabinet called Accounting Web Demo. And here's our AP, and here's our 2 drawers, one of them for 2012, where we have our document from Premium Springs Water, and that starts with a P, so hence we have a P folder. And then over here, our 2017 and our W, because we have WKRP, and that is our W document. So we've created the structure for that. Here's what I'm saying with all of this. Now that I've built an auto-filing rule into here, and now that I know that my system is working, the last time I should have to touch these documents is when I'm looking at them over here within Capture. So when I add our documents across, so let's add a third document into here. Let's see if I've got, I'm just trying to remember where I've got a different sort of document. Sorry, these are just some of my dummies that I have here. I know that you'd probably have better documents to use, but let's look for something that isn't in the system. Here's one. We're going to open this one. So we're going to, I'm going to add in this document. Because I've already done the export onto these, I'm going to remove this document and I'm going to remove this one. So now we've got our last document over here. We're going to see if there's a purchase order number on this. I scan it through quickly. I don't see it, so that's okay. We're going to go over to our tools. We go to our settings and we're going to turn on remove exported documents from the current session. So I say okay. So here's our use case. I'm someone who's working on the front desk. I receive a brand new document. I scan it in through SmartSoft Capture. I validate the information on it. I click export. The document closes. This is the last time I need to see this. So I can now minimize that process. I can go over to my tools. I can go to administration, managed imports, and we're now waiting for that document to arrive. So we're waiting for the batch to be completed. Of course, I'm not actively doing this. I'm just going about my other jobs. I have other things that I need to do. I'm hoping that this is, once I export the document, I don't have to touch it again. There's my batch, it's complete. So now I can just prove that out by going to refresh. And there's our new folder group that's been created, and there's our document that's been added. I don't have to do any of this validation manually. All of this has been done for me by exporting the document from Capture and bringing it into FileHold. So just by hitting that export button, that's the last thing I need to do. Once all of our steps of automation have been completed, we've now completed the processes on this, nothing further for us to do. Our big goal for when we're using Capture is to try to automate wherever we can, but not automate to the point of losing information or losing accuracy on our documents.